That beautiful Bletchley Park with the Amiga already on the door.
There hadn't been a big Amiga show in the UK for years, not since the 90s. They had user groups, small gatherings around the country, but nothing like this. This was the first vintage computer festival in Great Britain, and it was held on the 26th of April 2010 at the National Museum of Computing in Bletchley Park. And of course, Amiga had a massive presence. Not only did Amiga have all the classic machines, we had 2 new machines that were being released. This was unheard of. Every other group, a-eon, Amstrad, none of them had any new hardware coming out. The place was buzzing with local and national press. Geeks gathered round as a-eon and Hyperion launched their X1000 machine. We also had A-Cube at the side, who were launching their SAM 460. They were dwarfed a bit by the giant crowds that were gathered around the X1000. After all, the X1000 was the world's first 64-bit Amiga, so it's going to get a lot of attention. I felt a bit sorry for the guys showing the SAM 460, but in the end it was a small upgrade from the SAM 440, so people knew a lot about it already. I'd say the biggest disappointment of this show was Trevor Dickinson's voice, because there were so many people gathered around and he'd lost his voice and no one could hear him. But we did have Adam Barnes from Varisys, who did some very interesting information on the XMOS chip.
If you can think of it that you can basically write software to change that chip from a hard drive controller to a DSP or a sort of Commodore 64 sound chip, it allows you to write low level sort of like logic in software to sort of change. So usually you have to take a board out, put another board in. So it's kind of those are the things that actually lets you do in terms of like that's what I've been promised anyway. In the would you agree? Is that okay? In terms of use.
As a for instance, we seriously considered doing the HD audio controller of that board in an XMOS chip, because getting an off-the-shelf one was a pain. In the end, we solved that problem by using an SP600 Southbridge, which has HD audio built into it. But it was a close-run thing. That's the kind of stuff you can do with an XMOS chip.
So one thing that was attracting a lot of attention was the XMOS Xena coprocessor, which was basically a non-standard expansion slot that was called the Zorro slot, X-Zorro slot, named after Zorro, which used to be a Commodore Amiga custom hardware slot. You could put video toasters in there, you could design your own debug boards, you could basically build any custom hardware and get it to run with the Amiga. So this XMOS was kind of calling back to its original Amiga roots, trying to encourage people to, debug through it, but also you could use the X-Core without any load on the main processor, so it meant you had another kind of spare processor that can be used to things. And this was an attempt to bring in the XMOS community as well, not just the Amiga community, so turn it into something more, something that can be used within industry.
Widely misunderstood. What XMOS has made is a new class of programmable device. It's, to my mind, halfway between an FPGA and a very fast microcontroller. There are a couple of things in it that are very unusual. It does threading at the hardware level in a much more fine-grained way than traditional CPUs. It actually swaps between its hardware threads every instruction clock. So you've got at least 4 hardware threads, each running at an effective rate of 125 MIPS. So compared with like an old 8-bit micro, that's serious performance. But allied to that, they've very tightly coupled the processor to the I/Os in a way that I've not seen before. If you imagine getting an old 8-bit micro, bit banging, some simple protocol like say a serial, well, that's a fairly straightforward problem to solve. But then imagine you were trying to make it talk to an Ethernet 5 or a USB 2 file. You'd say to yourself, well, I need this thing to run at 100 megahertz, and I need those programmable I/O lines, those GPIOs, really tightly coupled. I'd need to know that I could react to an interrupt within a block or two. And these are the things that the XMOS chip does. Essentially, it lets you develop programmable logic in C. So you don't have to be a VHDL expert, and the base of users that can get into what I would call hardware design is now 100 times bigger. If you're a good C programmer, if you understand low-level C, you can work with the XMOS chip. On this board, it does something that I think is very important. So many areas of the design, you breathe on them and they won't work. DDR2 running at 1000 megahertz, PCI Express, and all this stuff is quite hairy, and it's one of the reasons why hair is the colour that it is. But I wanted part of the design, and I argued with a-eon that they should be part of the design that would be okay for people who have basic electronic skills. The fact that there's an XMOS chip on there means that you can get in and use part of that board without being an expert. You don't need a degree, maybe you've only studied electronics on a very basic level, you're a hobbyist. It's a way of getting into the hardware of the board and not getting stung and not finding it difficult to understand. I think in most cases, the XMOS chip is going to make sense to people who want to plug in a board. Perhaps 20 years ago they would have developed their own ISA boards, which is quite a straightforward thing to do, but there are very few opportunities to do things like that with modern computer hardware. We've got PCI slots, we've got PCI Express slots, we've got USB 2. All of those things are okay for me to design around, but I spend all my time doing it. For an ordinary user who's just hacking, they're not so easy. So again, the XMOS chip is a way into the design of doing simple hardware hacking for ordinary computer users and enthusiasts. I guess the other aspect is that the XMOS chip opens the world of fine-grained parallel processing, something that Paul and I used to work with 20 years ago in terms of the CMOS transputer processor. And the XMOS chip architecture at a low level is quite a lot like a transputer. So this is another thing that I think users of this new machine could get into, and we're kind of waiting to see which way the community takes this technology. Do they use it just for hardware hacking? Do they get into the fine-grained parallel processing? So I'm waiting to see where the demand is, and we're hoping to be involved in doing some of the designs to support both those applications.
Can I quickly, it's just like a random out there question, but like the idea of like adding more in the Zorro slot, so you could like have like 256 of these cores or something like that. Yeah. And would it be theoretically possible to emulate other CPUs at that level? So you could emulate like a Pentium or something like that. I don't know what the hardware and is that possible?
Not my area of expertise, but if you imagine having 256 loosely coupled cores, there are a lot of classes of compute problem that will map very well onto that. In my world, the kind of thing that I see being done using hardware like that is massive simulations. Actually, simulations of hardware as it happens.
Overall, it was an amazing show. I've not seen people so passionate about the Amiga for a long time. And this was the 25th birthday. Today, the day I'm releasing this video, is the 30th birthday of Amiga, and I'm in Amsterdam doing Amiga 30 Europe. So keep tuned to this channel, subscribe, and check out all the future and past Amiga events I'll be bringing you.